This is the second episode of a series on infrastructures. This is a series of 5 interviews to people based or coming from Ireland, Finland, Denmark, France, and the United States. My main focus is in understanding the possible role of design in infrastructures. I started this inquiry interviewing designers involved in the development of services for other infrastructures. I wanted to ask them, what can we design in relation to them? I work for an environmental research infrastructure, but this series will not focus on them, but will also cover food and cultural infrastructures. Why? Because I could not find enough designers with experience in environmental infrastructures, and because I like to look beyond the scope and focus of my work. This series is part of the work I do for the EU project IRISCC, Integrated Research Infrastructure Services for Climate Change Risks. In this project, we will develop services using a co-design framework. Therefore, my main question is how design could contribute to the development of services. Let's go to my guest today. Katie Berns is a designer and researcher coming from Ireland, based now in Finland. At the moment, her work focuses on service design for climate policy within the ICOS Cities project. In this interview, we mainly talk about food infrastructures and understanding her work in infrastructuring food waste activism. We talk about the concept for a smart fridge and a way of doing participatory action research with communities. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
My name is Katie Berns. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here in Finland in Aalto University, and I'm hoping to talk a little bit today about my research I've done during my PhD, which I carried out back in Stockholm, Sweden, where I was working at the Department of Computer and System Sciences in Stockholm University.
And what did you study as a bachelor or a master?
Yeah, so my bachelor's degree was back in Ireland, in Limerick. I'm from Ireland, and I studied digital media design / interaction design. Yeah, I enjoyed studying in Limerick. I learned a lot of interesting things about design and technology, but when I finished, I found myself a bit lost. Like I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that kind of work. So I moved to Canada for a working holiday, these 2-year visas you can get when you're in your mid-20s. So I went there and I couldn't get a job from my education as much as I tried. So I ended up working in the restaurant industry. And from there, I became really interested in sustainability, food systems sustainability.
So were you a waiter or like a cook?
No, a cook and then a chef in the end. So yeah. I had some experience cooking back in Ireland, and in Canada, because the cost of the education is so high, it's not super common for people to do a chef education because you don't really earn the money back. So they're quite open there to have people come in and train them on the job. So I was lucky to be able to do that. And one of the restaurants I worked in was very environmentally focused, sustainability focused. So I really became interested in sustainability through that. So then when I came back to Europe after my stay in Canada, I wanted to do a master to try and transform what I'd studied in my bachelor into something that connected with my new interest in food system sustainability. So I got accepted to a master's program in Copenhagen called Sustainable Design. And there I focused on working with different food systems, and such as like urban gardening and trying to bring local food onto the local political agenda, and kind of bringing in my knowledge of interaction design within this.
Perfect. And then you research on infrastructuring food waste, right?
Yeah.
Or food waste activism.
Yeah. So my PhD position, when it was advertised, it was to study digital civics and sustainable interaction design. So I thought, this is a really nice
Matching,
combination
yeah.
of what I did before. But the civic aspect wasn't something I'd been working with so much, but I found it was interesting. And when I started there, my goal was to study different alternative food systems. But the first study I did was through this food sharing community that I'd been involved with back in Copenhagen. And they were an activist group who would take surplus from supermarkets and restaurants, for example, collect it, sort through it, and then distribute it for free within the community. And they had like 3 events a week with up to 200 people at each. It was really impressive. So I had participated in them in that community as a community member, like someone coming to collect food, but also a little bit as a volunteer. So I thought this could be an interesting first study for my PhD. And then it just became the whole PhD because there was so many interesting things to unpack.
And why the word infrastructuring there? What does it mean, infrastructuring food?
Yeah, so in my work, because I've come from this human-computer interaction or interaction design point of view, it has this underlying idea of technology, digital technology. And what comes up a lot in the food sharing communities that I've worked with, the one in Copenhagen and also one in Stockholm, is this balance of, where does technology support and where does it actually take away from the social experiences and the face-to-face interactions that are taking part. So I really tried to understand this. So in my thesis, it's called, infrastructuring food waste activism, because it's kind of twofold. First, I look at how technology may or may not support the organization of activism. So the work that goes into actually setting these communities up, helping them run day to day, managing volunteers.
So you mean like the digital infrastructures are like, for example, the tools that they use to connect to each other, and then the physical ones?
Yeah, but with infrastructuring, it's the physical tools, the digital tools, the practices they take, so socio-technical practices, values, these all make up the infrastructure for the community. So it's not just the digital infrastructure, although that's part of it. So with my work, I was really trying to understand, okay, which part is the digital, which part isn't. So, for example, there could be some digital interventions that could undermine some of the values that existed. So
give me an example. I like the examples.
Okay, so one kind of key one that came up is kind of balancing efficiency and care. So, of course, at events, you could design a technology quite easily that could get people in and out, one at a time, collect their their share of the food and be on their way. But then, one of the real values that emerged from the community was that, people would come together, engage with each other, encounter each other around food waste as an issue. They would also see all of the food waste that was going to be shared with everybody, not just their one part. So I think that really took, food waste from an abstract concept to something that was really tangible. So this would be an example where, bringing people together in that way was adding a lot of value for the community, and especially for the volunteers who were doing all this work to raise awareness. So for, overall, if you just brought people in and out one by one, a lot of that would be lost. Then it's just a free supermarket.
Yeah. And yes, one could have that prejudice that the ones that go for this type of events are the ones that are more indeed in need of free food. But is it like that, or is it also environmental activists?
Yeah, so that's kind of a tricky situation. It's something that comes up a lot in my work, and when you're talking about kind of food provisioning in general. So the community is driven by an activist need for sustainability, ecological sustainability, and reducing waste. But of course, there are people coming for many different reasons. There's people coming as an activist decision, environmentalists, whatever. There's also people who come because they're maybe in need of food, they need the support. And there's people who come maybe like students who just rather spend their money on beer than get the food. There's people who come as a social event. You're Argentinian, actually, aren't you?
Yes.
I remember I was going around one event asking people, how did you find out about it? And I kept hearing the Argentinian WhatsApp group over and over again. Yeah, and then people come. One other surprising thing that I learned when I was asking people why they came, we get to try new ingredients. So, in Denmark especially, groceries can be quite expensive. So they can come and try maybe new vegetables or new products that they maybe don't want to invest in if they're not sure if they like them. So there was a range of reasons why people came. But of course, it does require a certain sensitivity and this understanding of, it's not taking food away from people who need it. It's taking food away from the trash. I think it would be amazing if you could just take all the surplus food in the world and give it to all the people who are experiencing food insecurity. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. There's a lot of, logistical and sociocultural, socio-technical aspects to that, because if we think about fairness, and that's something I describe a lot in my work, is, you could say fairness is getting the food to the right people, but it's also about getting the right food to the right people. So there's some surplus items that, it wouldn't be ethical to give to someone who's experiencing food insecurity. So a lot of the items that are shared at these events would be something that's past its best before date. It's something that the shops aren't going to sell. And it can require, the person who takes it to come home and say, okay, it's okay now, but tomorrow I'm going to have to make the decision if it's good or bad. Where someone like me who's privileged to say, no, I eat something else. If you don't have that privilege, maybe you have no choice, Yeah. So it's complicated. And it's not that the people are being turned away, but these kind of communities don't have the capacities required to, regulate this and have the sensitivities that are required to run as support for people who are experiencing food insecurity.
And tell me one thing, you are a designer. What do you think, or what did you design in this context?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think what I tried to get across in my thesis is design in this context. So the design work I've done is not kind of explicit design work in many ways. It's more of discrete design work. So the methods I used throughout my PhD was participatory action research. So this is where you actually are active in the community you're researching, but also that the community members have a role to play in the research as well. So setting the research question and, engaging in this research process together. So in my case, especially with my second case study, was a food sharing community in Stockholm that I was a founding member of alongside some others. So kind of from the beginning, I agreed with the other founders. There was 8 or 9 of us, I think, that, okay, we're going to start this community. I'm also want to do research on it. So what I really want to understand is how these communities get started, because I had engaged with the other community that was well established. So you can hear what people tell you about it, but you don't really know what happened. So together we're like, okay, let's start this community, and I'm going to kind of research it at the same time. So for us, the design was designing this community, designing our practices, designing our values, designing our infrastructures.
But in a way, you were in a kind of very privileged situation, because this community have a media expert or a media design expert that could choose very well which tools to use, right?
Yes and no. So I definitely, that's a really important thing with all research, but particularly participatory action research, is, really understanding your biases. So I had a dual role as a researcher and an active member of the community and founder. So I'm kind of have a stake in each game, So, I really wanted the community to work, and I often put my role as a volunteer first. But I also came from the knowledge I developed from the other community. So sometimes I could actually I have been ashamedly maybe a bit pushy on my agenda, because I feel like I have all this knowledge from my previous work in the other community. But in fact, like, a lot of people came from similar communities around Europe. So like really balancing this, okay, what's my opinion, what's my role as a researcher? But I would say I wasn't like an expert in designing those communities, as I said. I just knew how one was running already. So we were really understanding how they get started. And I looked at it in terms, if I think about infrastructuring, are you familiar with the concept of an artifact ecology?
No. And probably not the audience, so you can explain it.
So this is like, It's describes similar to an infrastructure, but it describes like the digital and non-digital artifacts that are brought together to support the work of often activist community-led initiatives. These kind of initiatives don't have a big budget. They're often not creating their own softwares, their own tools, or paying for something. So they use what they have at hand and like create a new use case for it. So the concept of artifact ecologies, which I'm pretty sure was started by Suzanne Bodker, it looks at how, you know, as communities putting these ecologies together as a design process in itself, because things get to swapped in and out. You know, there's instances where, you know, some people in the community want to use a tool and others don't. So they call it like non-use. So they don't use it because they don't want to, you know. It's not like in a workplace where people are forced to use certain tools. So this kind of negotiation process and design process that goes towards, you know, building these ecologies of tools and artifacts that communities use to sustain themselves.
But sorry, maybe you say it and I miss it, but what is the difference between ecology and infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I feel like infrastructure captures more of like the values, the practices, where ecology is much more focused on the tools.
So you were writing about the sensitivity for design. What are the sensitivities that you took into consideration in this work?
So that's, you know, there's quite many. And I think it makes more sense to kind of explain it there's kind of a dual focus of my research. So as we mentioned before, this subtitle of infrastructuring food waste activism, that's kind of one way of looking at the research. And then the main title of designing community economies, that's another kind of flavor that exists within the research. They are interconnected, but I think just to make it clear, if we think of those as two separate, the infrastructuring food waste activism looks a lot at the organizational work. So I have one set of sensitivities that really focuses on how communities are organized, how they learn from each other and co-evolve. And that looks at understanding, you know, the different capacities of different participants. So not everybody has to participate in the same way. There's many different roles people can play based on their capacities. Yeah, like understanding socio-technical practices. So again, like what a new community can take from existing communities, but how they recontextualize it to their own space. So a lot of the sensitivities are like, okay, this is something we learned from looking at these communities. Maybe it's relevant for yours too, but it's not prescriptive because there's a local and contextual relevance to each of the communities. And also new communities as activists is something I noticed a lot in starting the group in Stockholm. They want to pave their own way, you know? You want to create your own community. You don't want to take a template that exists elsewhere and just move it to your context, even if that was possible. People don't want to do that. So yeah, some of the sensitivities reflect on kind of the organizational work of setting up the community, maintaining the community, and entangled in that is organization or the sensitivities for infrastructuring community economies. So kind of alternative economic practices at food sharing events. So as you can imagine, when you're sharing food for free with large groups of people, you have this challenge of who gets what, when, how much. So when you don't have the infrastructure of market models where you're buying and selling stuff and, you know, how much you get depends on how much money you have, first come, first served kind of model. When you're giving stuff for free, and in this context, these models don't work. You know, it's beyond the logic of market models. So then what else do we have? The other kind of flavor of my work is trying to design for these kind of community economies where people are putting in different labor, but also taking different amounts of food. So for example, one of the sensitivities is about designing queuing of food sharing events. So what to consider. So you don't necessarily should consider like people coming one by one, but people will come as groups of friends, as families, and then negotiating how much food is fair for them to take is different. Because it's not necessarily like, let's give everyone 3 bananas, 5 oranges, and a loaf of bread. Because the point here is to reduce waste. So there's no point in giving that to somebody who's going to take it home, not eat it, and then put it in their bin. You're just moving it from bin to bin. So there's a lot of kind of dynamics there that think, okay, what happens after someone takes the food? So what's fair for one person to take isn't necessarily what's fair for another. So the queuing sensitivities there tried to understand these dynamics and look at, okay, if we were designing technology for queuing, how can we balance these tools with the different values that exist? Like my example earlier, I mean, efficiency and care. It's not that efficiency isn't important, but it's not the only thing that's important, right? So it's finding that right balance. And then links back into when I talk about fairness, of another set of sensitivities there about fairness. So how is fairness conceptualized within the community? So like you brought up earlier, is fairness, giving the food to people who maybe need it the most? Is fairness the people who are putting in the work? Should they get first choice of the food, or, collect more foods than the others? Is fairness just reducing the waste? So it doesn't matter who gets it once it's not wasted. So there's many different conceptualizations of fairness, and the sensitivities there are like thinking about, okay, how can we think of these in concert with each other? It's not necessarily about choosing one or the other, but how can you kind of configure your community around these different conceptualizations of fairness? And then the final set of sensitivities I have is focused on action research. So how researchers like myself can actually contribute to communities and actually help them to develop as members ourselves, and kind of the thinking about how can we keep issues on the table, try to create open discussions. So for example, one role I saw very much in the communities I worked with was kind of moving past the binary of technology. So people would often think, oh, technology is going to solve all our problems, or keep it away from us, it's going to ruin everything. So like I mentioned in the beginning, I think through my experience of working in human-computer interaction and interaction design, I can have a better view maybe of, okay, well, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We can have a little bit here, a little bit there. And if it's thoughtfully designed, it can really enhance the community. So yeah, that's kind of one of the ideas, and also reflecting more on the research process itself, of thinking you want to contribute to the community. You don't want to be extracting, how can we actually contribute to these communities, take part in day-to-day activities. And of course, that's challenging for a lot of people. I was fortunate that I had the flexibility and the time myself to work in these communities. So I was kind of working around the clock because my free time and my studies were surrounded food sharing. It's like my whole life was food sharing. So I'm at the stage now, just throw it in the bin, I don't care anymore.
So it's very different to do this research on infrastructuring when you are researching activism.
Yeah.
Right? And this is especially the interesting perspective there. What is different? Because now you are also involved in researching other type of infrastructures that do not relate to activism. So how do you move it? Or how, or maybe if we want to be more concrete, now if you have to give advices to people working in other types of infrastructures from your work in food infrastructure, which advices could you give?
That's a big question. I think one of the key differences with activism and community-led initiatives, especially like bottom-up initiatives, is, like I mentioned before, it's the flexibility. Technologies need to be something that everyone's willing to use. So one example from both communities I've studied was trying to use Slack. Oh, let's use Slack to, organize our work. Most people don't want to use it, so they refuse to even join. And then others, myself included, I sign up, but I don't remember to check it because it's not part of my daily life. I'm probably going to check my Instagram, check my Facebook. I've built the habit of that, my email, but I'm not checking Slack. So it's kind of adding another interface in that's like just clogging up people's, headspace. Here's another one. So in work now I use Slack because that's something that's expected in work. But in a community initiative, you don't have to do that, you do what you want. So I think understanding this flexibility and actually the negotiation process that has to exist about deciding what tools to use, what infrastructures to use. And this can be technology, it can be the values, the practices, that you can't the volunteers don't just pick that, right?
Yeah.
It's negotiated between them when they're organizing, but then also between the people who are attending, the donors, all the different actors involved. It's a negotiation process. It's not like one set formula. And then, of course, that expands when you're bringing it to different contexts. And if you think that compared to any kind of more formal, so a workplace, it has more formal structures. You can say, okay, we're using this, this, and this. Not that there won't be discussion about it, but it doesn't have this kind of ongoing flexibility, ongoing change. Okay, we were using this now, and now it's stopped. So in one of my articles, I reflect on how with different organizational structures, when the community began, we had a lot of people. So we planned our organizational structure around that. Okay, we split up into teams. One team focuses on getting donors, another team focuses on running our social media, for example. And then the participant numbers reduce, because that's the nature of this kind of work. We'd have international students would go back home, or people get a family or a new job, so they can't
put
as much time.
They are not interested anymore in that.
Exactly. So the participant numbers fluctuate.
Yeah.
So then suddenly this old organizational system doesn't work anymore. So this flexibility is really important when you're thinking about infrastructures for activism. But I also think it can feed into, you can learn a lot from it in other situations.
Yeah.
So like I'm working with the ICOS now, and we're wondering how we can create services to support city governments to use like data-informed climate change policy, right? But like I said, do we really want to just put another platform on them? Here's another platform you have to use on top of the 7 other you're already using. And where's that actually going to fit into your work day? Is it going to become beneficial or more of like a burden for you? So that's one thing to consider. And I mean, and thinking about, we want this more kind of connective situation across Europe. That's something that's come up in a lot of the design workshops we've done. And we want to, city to city collaboration, country to country collaboration. But yeah, then we have to find a system that kind of fits.
They might not be using the same tools, and
exactly,
they might not be. So you have
finding
to
something that fits that as well.
So there is a lot of negotiation, no?
Exactly.
In this co-design process of just picking certain tools.
And then coming back to this notion of artifact ecology, that ties in with this. Okay, you have all these different artifacts. How do they work in concert with each other?
This interview is part of the list D&D in English, Infrastructures, Alimentos, Comida, Irlanda, Finlandia, Activismo y Diseño. The list can be found in Spotify, in YouTube, and in our website. My effort to classify the episodes in this podcast relates to the fact that it is still super hard to navigate audio, and I have published more than 550 episodes. As this podcast is widely used as a resource for consultation, we need to be able to search within the episodes. Most of the episodes belong to more than one list or series. This one, for example, could have been an episode from the series Food Design. In 2023, I did a series of 5 episodes together with Andrés Sicard, a Colombian professor and researcher, and in collaboration with the Latin American Network of Food Design. Now we have already 18 episodes in relation to food design, all with the different perspectives and embracing different design approaches and disciplines. The interviews explore the development of biomaterials derived from the food waste and delved into the revival of traditional method of food preparation, just to give a couple of examples. Now let's come back to the interview. Katie has a lot still to tell us.
And what about the physical design work that comes from this?
So I think when I started my PhD, I had a lot of goals. My initial idea was to actually design some technologies, whether it be physical artifacts or, or online platforms, applications. But as I got more and more into this activist work of surplus food sharing, there was so much to unpack, there was so much to understand. So the work that's published as part of my PhD is very much, this more foundational work. So it's like understanding the context, understanding the field, kind of trying to extract, okay, what should we consider when we're designing here, through designing the community itself, or like exploring how we could design queuing mechanisms to support the community. So it was very much this understanding, kind of getting to know the field in a deep way, which I found was really valuable. But then, of course, you're itching, at least I was, to actually design something then. Okay, what can we do with this understanding? So I'm lucky that I still have a lot of data collected and a lot of insights from my time during my PhD. As I mentioned, I was doing, very full-on participatory action research work. So I'm lucky I have a lot of data that I can still work with and draw on. So one project that we just submitted for publication now that I was really excited about was reframing the smart fridge for a food sharing context. So we explored with the community in Stockholm. We looked at, okay, how can we use a fridge, like a technologically enhanced fridge, to help us share food asynchronously? So maybe I need the backstory. So at the food sharing communities, like I mentioned, it's food sharing events they have each week. So in Copenhagen, they had 3 a week. In Stockholm, we had 2 a week. And then when it was COVID pandemic, we couldn't have these events anymore. But the community were like, hang on, but we really want to keep this going. And maybe people even need it more now when, people are out of work and whatnot. So, okay, how can we kind of continue sharing food within the social distancing requirements? And we thought, okay, we'll use a fridge. There's some other communities doing this, sharing just asynchronously through a fridge. Let's do that. So we got the fridge set up. We got a fridge donated. Apparently it's actually really easy to get someone to give you an old fridge.
So whoever could open the fridge and take food from there.
Exactly, yeah. So anyone can come, take the food. So what we would do then, so we continued similar to the events where the volunteers would go to the donors, collect the food, we'd sort through it, what's still edible, what's not. We have that first barrier of protection. And then we'd fill the fridge, and we used to take pictures, photographs, and then post it on our social media, on Facebook and on Instagram. Oh, the fridge is filled here, come and get it. And then as this kind of progressed, we noticed that the people visiting the fridge started posting comments underneath these photographs we were posting, like, oh, there's still X, Y, and Z left, you should come. Oh, there's nothing really left, don't come. Because, as I mentioned before, fairness is a challenge. And at the events, the volunteers and the people attending the events could negotiate together. Okay, we have X amount of food, it's variable each week, as are the number of participants. Let's see how much food there is, how many people are here, and we decide then, how much people should take. Where at the fridge, that's kind of lost. So you come to the fridge, you don't know if you're the first one, if you're the last one. Should I take a lot because otherwise it's going to go bad? Or should I just take a little because people are going to come later? So, these kind of challenges, the community started to tackle these through these posts. So, and this was working quite well. And then after COVID, we went back to having our events. But we thought, why not also have the fridge? Because that makes it more accessible to other people. If we don't share everything maybe at the events, then we can put it in the fridge and people can come at another time. So we were in the process then of setting up a new fridge at the other community centre we were running our events. And we thought, hang on, what if we kind of took this idea, this practice that emerged, and see if we can take it further. So this is where the idea of the community smart fridge came about. And I conducted some design processes. So first cooperative design, it took place at one of the events, and we made a big canvas, and we asked people to just join. So it was volunteers, people coming to collect food, people working at the community centre. They could just come in and out of the discussion when it suited them. So when they weren't collecting food or they weren't busy. And we just spoke about, okay, what do you think are the opportunities of running a new community fridge hour? What could the challenges be? Who could be responsible for these different activities? So, what will it take to run the fridge, and who could be responsible for these? So cleaning.
Yeah, I remember that, for example, in my building, they wanted to do something like that, because we have some, in Finland, we have in the cellar this kind of like natural fridge, because they are like these cold cellars. So they wanted to have this possibility of exchanging food, but it didn't develop because nobody wanted to go, and because also someone have to go from time to time there to clean, or to select, or I mean that nobody wanted to have the responsibility of going there all the time to clean and see who has, like the food that nobody has eaten.
So this is, I'm telling you now, this is going to solve all your problems. So when we did this kind of initial collaborative brainstorming over a couple of instances, we did it 3 times. And then kind of what came out of it was 3 kind of central challenges. The first one was managing fairness, as I discussed, is something that comes up a lot in the communities. The second was cleaning and maintenance. So, how are we going to maintain the fridge, keep it clean? Who's going to be responsible for that? And the third one was building communities. So, as I mentioned, the events are social. There's a lot of value that people appreciate from coming together, coming with their friends. So can we use the fridge as a kind of proxy to keep this community building going? So those were the 3 kind of key challenges or opportunities we took forward from the first cycle of co-design. And then we started another one where we did ideation and prototyping workshop with community members and alongside professional designers. So there was 3 groups of 3, 2 designers and 1 community member in each. It would have been nicer to have more community members, but you know how these things work. So each of the teams worked with one of these challenges. And we came up at the end, we had some really interesting ideas. So for example, the fairness group kind of explored, okay, can we make a fridge forecast, So each group in the design workshop, they had a miniature fridge they were given. There was a lot of digital components, like different sensors, like lights, trackpads, these kind of things. So actual physical components that they could look at and try to design in their fridge. We also had a set of personas, so the kind of key actors in the community. The groups were encouraged to, design for at least 2 personas at a time to, keep this community aspect going. So the fairness group, for example, they made their own persona. So one of the existing personas was a collector, so someone who comes to collect the food. And they made their adapted persona, say, the faraway collector. So this is somebody who wants to come, but they live much further away. So for them, the stakes are a bit higher. If they come all this way and then there's nothing left, that's not fair. And maybe it's going to deter them from coming then, which is not good for the community. So they were exploring, maybe how could we design the fridge that kind of takes this dynamic into consideration. So they had 2 ideas. One where you maybe have a box that is or a shelf in the fridge that's reserved for people coming later. So like reserved until 8 p.m. or something. And then after that time, then it was open to everyone. But let's reserve this for maybe consider people who are coming from further away. And they also had an idea to do like an activity forecast. So like, can the door keep track of how many times it's being opened and closed? And over time, collect data on that and know, okay, if I come now at 5 p.m., it can kind of predict, usually there's like 3-4 more people coming after me, or usually there's no one after this time. Yeah. It's not perfect, but it can help people to kind of make their decision on what's fair to take or not.
And these are like kind of concept ideas, right?
Exactly, yeah. So then, for example, the community building group, they had an idea, their kind of core idea was to personify the fridge. So they named them Fridgy McFridgeface, as most naming of things go. So they focus on, okay, how can we, use the fridge as a proxy between community members? So they designed a system where you can record messages for each other and also like video what's in the fridge. And so every time the door would open, the last message would play, and then someone else could make the new one. And they also explored how Friggy could maybe, you know, share recipes or give people ideas of what to use the food for. And then the cleaning and maintenance, they focused a lot on stock management. Can we find a way to kind of prevent the fridge from getting messy in the first place? So there was a lot of different interesting ideas, and a lot of them were overlapping. So following that workshop, we, like my co-authors and I, we kind of did some rejigging. Okay, how do these ideas fit together? And then started sketching some design concepts. And that's where this paper we've submitted now has ended. But we have 4 design concepts that emerged from this. So the first is the mood setter. So the mood setter is like a light-based interface outside of the fridge, and it uses like weight sensors to look at, and inputs from users that looks at, how much food is in it. It will glow differently. Does it need to be cleaned? So the fridge is kind of communicating its current state with you and with other community members to try and, you know, share responsibility for cleaning and manage fairness. And then the second idea we have is a dial box. So this is a box that's in the fridge. So one challenge of like trying to use surplus food is determining, you know, is it good to eat or not? And people have very different ideas or standards on what they would be willing to eat. I know with the colleague of mine at the community, I used to think I'll eat anything, but he was even more extreme. Like maybe there's an apple and like 3/4 of it is bruised and bad. Oh, but that other quarter is still fine. And we had another instance where during the brainstorming, there was 2 people from a student dorm standing there, and they were talking like, oh, you know, I went to the shared fridge once, and someone had left like there was a box of stuff where people could share stuff they weren't going to use. And somebody left like a half-eaten jar of peanut butter. And I was like, that's not right. And then the other woman was like, oh, I took that. So I think it just shows, how people have different ideas of what
is eatable.
Exactly, yeah. So the dial box was like, you put food in here, and I can come visit the fridge. I look at it. I think it has like a day left, so I can set this timer for 1 day. And then people can come and see if they want to take it or not, or reset the timer. And it was try and see if people can, you know, collaboratively train themselves in this kind of food literacy, you know, trusting your senses, is food safe to eat or not? And when you kind of crowdsource that, it gives you more confidence. So that was another design. We had the memo cam. So this kind of comes from this idea I was talking before, where you can like emerges the kind of personification and the community building with stock management. So you can take this camera, it's like a payphone on the side, where you can video what's in the fridge when you put it in, or, you know, just show what's left when you come, and that can be posted to social media.
Yeah.
You can also video yourself and leave a message for the next person.
These are super nice.
Oh, thank you.
Fun to work in these concepts. And
I'll leave it at that.
Are you planning to in the future to take some of them and try to make them real?
Hopefully. So where we've stopped now is we have these like booklets describing the design concepts, and we've sent them to members of different food sharing communities. So from Stockholm, from Denmark, in Germany, and Luxembourg, and the UK. So we've sent these books out, and they're going to do like an annotated booklet. We've already received some back. And even the ones we sent out, there's like those communities want to share it with their fellow communities. So we're going to have a really nice set of feedback. So
nice. So they are in a way like a prop for conversation also for the community.
Yeah. So the idea was we're thinking kind of both sustainability in design and sustainability through design. So it's kind of, you know, the fridge, instead of buying like this new, you know, monolithic fridge, how we normally see the smart fridge now. And it can be problematic because the fridge itself lasts longer than the technology, right? The fridge is only smart as long as the technology is up to date. Yeah. And this kind of reduces the life cycle of the fridge, because fridges last way longer. So with our idea then, it was like it's reflecting on the kind of sustainable values of the community, but also, you know, the lack of funds. So you can buy these technologies, build them yourself. So they're designed to be like a make-it-yourself kit. So you can buy them, or you can just see the components and buy them yourself, build it yourself, and then augment your fridge with it. So if you want them all, great, but you can get them gradually as you need them. if you just want one or two that are relevant for community, you can add them on yourself. So we wanted this flexibility. So, it's supporting the sustainable activity of reducing food waste, but it's also kind of making the activists into make-tivists, where they're, making technology to engage in their activism.
And now you can go to the industry making fridges. And
that's where we're thinking, there's a lot of course, a lot of the designs are specific to food sharing, but there's a lot of scope for other kind of shared fridges. So
yeah, definitely. And some of these concepts, they could definitely work in other settings, right?
Exactly.
Like even in a family, it's a nice idea to have like when you open the fridge, you leave a message for the next one. Like, I could imagine that.
Yeah, so that's one project that's come out of the thesis that I'm really excited about. That's more hands-on design work.
Super nice. And what inspires you? What are you reading, listening, or watching in relation to this work on infrastructures?
Yeah, so right now, as I said, I'm still kind of tipping away at some of the research on this topic, but I've now joined ICOS, so as the postdoc.
Integrated Carbon Observation System.
And so a lot of I've been working a lot with cooperative design and designing with different multidisciplinary groups. So I'm bringing that methodological knowledge forward, but I'm also working in quite a different domain now in my postdoc. So I moved from the bottom up to top down, working with governance. And then also, even though it's sustainability, I'm not so experienced with greenhouse gas emissions. So I find a lot of it's going over my head. It's like the eddy covariant and I don't know what this is about. So now I'm trying to, get more familiar with these processes and look at how we can, have infrastructure, data-driven, responsive policy making. And that's really about, it's like I spoke about before, it's like from a human-computer interaction point of view. It's about looking, okay, where can the technology work to benefit the policymakers, the city actors? It's not necessarily that the, really high quality, physics first data that's collected is necessarily can just be given directly to policymakers. There needs to be a translation process there. So that's the infrastructure between the data that's available and the needs of the policymakers, and also trying to create a feedback loop between the two. So, should the scientists just collect the data that they think is interesting, or can it also be influenced by what city actors and other actors actually find useful?
So you're actually reading a lot and thinking a lot in your new project, these
exactly,
ICOS Cities.
I've been reading a lot about data-driven design.
Something to recommend on that?
From my particular field, so I'm working in human-computer interaction, but also a kind of subfield called CSTW, which is computer-supported collaborative work. And there was a workshop that was at the conference last year, and they had a call for, okay, how can we use data more collaboratively? I'll have to come back to you with the name. Okay. So they had a call for that. So I've been kind of using this as my baseline and really inspired by, how can we consider how data is used in different ways? So about making data usable, about also understanding the level of abstraction. So, for example, one thing we think about in the ICOS is that, and I just said it myself, the data collected is quite complex. So how can you reduce that complexity in different ways? So it could be about, communicating it in smaller chunks. It could be reducing the resolution of it. But then there's also ethical concerns with that. Who gets to see what and why? And, how can we organize this kind of complex work between people? So I want to think about these aspects as well, kind of on a deeper level of what does it mean to, move data from one point to another, and the translation or the black box that exists in between.
I love the work Katie has done because she focuses on the practices of activists. I share with her the view that by listening and learning from activists, we can become more informed, empathetic, and better equipped to advocate for change. Activists are experts in the area. They often possess deep knowledge and experience in their field. They provide valuable insight that can inform our understanding of complex issues. They have real-world experiences and bring first-hand experiences and stories on the issues they advocate. Activists do not fear to take action, and they have a sense of community. They know how to push solutions, or at least they have tried many different ways. Many researchers also are activists, and they use their research to move forward a certain agenda. Also, there is a lot of research that deals with the work of activist groups. In this podcast, we have published more than 40 episodes in which designers have been working with activists, or at least their design work has been to support different causes. Actually, our next book will be focusing on activism and design, and it is a compilation of interviews from that list and bringing also a reflection on design work in relation to activism. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This podcast has been recorded in Helsinki Open Waves, an audio studio in Kaisa Cultural Center, part of Helsinki City. Kaisa is a cultural center that promotes the development of Helsinki into a diverse city by means of the arts and culture. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram or X, Twitter, or visit our website, diseñoydiaspora.org. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Stay tuned for more. We've got a lot in store. Till next time, goodbye and design some more.